Good morning, colleagues. It's now 9:30 and we are going to start the session, the IP Scrutiny gathering session.
Apologies, sorry, just apologies, Terry. We're not live as yet. I'm just waiting for IT to give the go-ahead. Well, it will go up in the chat, okay?
I'm live.
We're live, Chairman.
What a great thing. As I said, welcome, colleagues. It's now 9:30 and we are, this is Growth Infrastructure and Planning, the IP Scrutiny. This is a challenge for all of us in this arrangement, but let's see how we can get this through this and raise some points of issue that we feel are relevant. So, as a chairman, there's an announcement I have to make up front, which is due to coronavirus pandemic, the council will be holding this meeting electronically. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in electronic capacity, and there is a link in the council's website for them to do so. Members of this meeting are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish, and I prefer if they did. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members raise hand function, and that is the function that's somewhere down the bottom where it says raise hand, something like that. Yeah, if you can, please, because it's better than waving at me, because I can't see everybody, of course, on my screen, but I can see raised hands, which is helpful. So thank you for that. As we said up front, there's some key lines of inquiry which we have on this particular portfolio, and we're going to go through those key lines of inquiry. I'm going to go through them with you people here, and at the end give you the opportunity to ask some other relevant points that you may have around this particular budget of the portfolio holder to which we're referring. Before we start doing that, I'm going to ask for introductions, if I can, please. So, first of all, can each of the councillors introduce themselves? And I'm going to call your name out. If you can introduce yourself, who you are and where you represent, yeah? And no particular order. Marius, you want to start, please?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Marios Artemi. I am the County Councillor for Welwyn Garden City South.
Thank you. Ken, you want to come in next?
Yes, good morning. My name's Ken Crofton. I'm the County Councillor for Hertford Rural.
Paul de Court, you want to come in next?
Yep, I'm Paul de Court, County Councillor for Hartmondon North East Division.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask Jeff Jones to come in next, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Jeff Jones, member for Buntingford.
Thank you. Jan, you want to come in?
Yep, Jan Madden, and County Councillor for Hemel Hempstead South East.
Nigel?
Nigel Taylor, County Councillor for Berkhamsted.
Sharon?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Taylor. I'm the County Councillor for Bedwell Division in Stevenage.
Thank you. Colette?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Colette Whitelow, and I represent Hemel Hempstead North East.
And finally, Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Jakowski. I'm the County Councillor for Hatfield South.
Thank you for that. And I'm Councillor Terry Hone. I represent Letchworth South. So that's introductions done. Now, if I can ask officers who are present, who are going to participate in this, say who they are, please. Benji, can you lead that round the room, please, of who's on screen?
I'm just putting up who I can see. One moment. So, officer, I can see Georgie Sheridan.
Good morning, I'm Georgie Sheridan. I'm Finance Manager for Environment and Infrastructure.
Thank you.
Kate Isles.
Good morning, I'm Kate Isles. I'm the Finance Manager for Capital.
Thank you.
We also have Matt Buckland.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Matt Buckland, the Head of Finance for ENI, and also support adult care services as well.
Colin.
Morning all, I'm Colin Haig, I'm the Director of Growth and Place.
Thank you.
Colin, is there anyone else of importance who you else would like to bring in? I can't quite see everyone.
I think Patsy Dale is on the call.
You're coming to Patsy as well.
Hi, good morning, Patsy Dale, your new Executive Director for Sustainable Growth. So pleased to see you all.
Thank you for that, Patsy. Benji, thank you for doing that. And now perhaps Stephen B, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, Stephen Bolton. I'm County Councillor for Hatfield Rural, and I'm the exec member for growth, infrastructure and planning, and I suppose sustainable growth and so on.
And does Jonathan want to come in?
Yeah, I'm Councillor Jonathan Kay. I'm member for Ware South and Deputy Cabinet Member for Growth, Infrastructure and Planning.
Thank you. I hope we haven't missed anybody. If we have, I apologise for not introducing themselves. But so now the public know who you are and what we're up to. Yeah, that's good. So I'm now going to move on to what we described as those key lines of inquiry. And I don't propose going through the particular details, but before we do that, Stephen, you want to come in and just say a few words about your portfolio in a quick 5-minute session?
Right, a quick 5 minute. Okay, Terry, thank you.
I mean, I'm not going to time you, but certainly.
Yes, yeah. Okay. Yes, it's probably worth quickly introducing the portfolio for those who aren't members of the panel or not familiar with it. The Growth and Place Service comprises 3 core functions. It's Herts County Council's statutory planning team, which prepares the Minerals and Waste Plan, determines county planning applications and takes enforcement action. It works with district councils on their local planning and planning applications to help facilitate good growth and to secure planning contributions for HCC services such as highways and education. It is also, it has a strategic planning role to engage with other issues happening in and around Hertfordshire, such as the local plan, Oxford Cambridge Arc, Luton Stansted Airports, joint strategic plans, the UK Innovation Corridor and others. You should note, however, that Minerals and Waste Plan is also part of the environment portfolio, and strategic transport matters are part of the highways portfolio. So I'm very pleased to observe that Herts County Council has adopted an increasingly positive attitude towards the sustainable growth agenda over recent years. Councillors and officers work closely with their district counterparts to consider growth and infrastructure issues on a county-wide basis. Officers work closely with district councils to help them prepare sound local plans and to build good development proposals with the right level of transport improvements and the right number of school places. Hertfordshire Growth Board has been established to consider these issues and to liaise with government on a possible growth deal for the county. Herts County Council has appointed a new executive director for sustainable growth, which is Patsy, and you just met Patsy. Now, the Growth Service currently comprises about 60 staff. There is about an 8% vacancy rate at the moment, with some hard to fill roles because planning is a specialist career and difficult to find planners at the moment. The IT bids will potentially add about 8 new staff to the total number. The county is planning to build in excess of 100,000 homes over the next 10 to 15 years, which is nearly a 30% increase on the previous numbers. And the housing trajectory indicates that at least half of these homes will be built on large sites of 500 units. And this includes 2 strategic sites for 10,000 homes, each at the Harlow Gilston in East Hertfordshire site and Hemel Garden communities in Dacorum and St Albans. Now, we are seeking to add 2 senior planning officers and 2 senior transport officers to work closely with district councils, developers and other partners on the delivery of these strategic sites. And as well as helping to facilitate developments, this will also ensure schemes are well designed and include provision for sustainable transport, highways, education, libraries and other Herts County Council services. We are seeking £300,000 per year to contribute to the ongoing partnership working with Dacorum and St Albans to help deliver 10,000 homes and 10,000 jobs in Hemel Hempstead. This will help fund preparatory work such as master planning, infrastructure, transport strategy for the area, and appointment of a director and independent chair, as well as ongoing officers working on the Crown Estates and other landowners. We are seeking to add 1 landscape officer, 1 ecologist and 1 archaeologist to help provide high quality advice to district councils to inform their local plans and the determination of planning applications, including large and strategic sites. This will improve the team's ability to coordinate a countrywide approach to biodiversity net gain. We are seeking additional funding to remain involved in strategic planning activities for the long-term benefit of the county. This includes work on the London Plan, the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, the UK Innovation Corridor, and the preparation of the joint strategic plans for the North East and South West areas of the county. We are seeking additional funding for Section 102 as Section 106 Technical Manager to negotiate and secure contributions for HCC services based on new planning contributions guide and to defend HCC's position as planning appeals and inquiries where necessary. We anticipate some additional savings efficiencies arising from the planning performance agreements and pre-application advice associated with large and strategic sites. And we anticipate some additional savings efficiencies arriving from service level agreements with district councils to provide landscape ecology and archaeology advice to them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think it gives a very detailed background, particularly around manpower, metaphorically speaking, or person power, shall I say. And one of the clear lines of inquiry certainly mentioned in what we lined up so far was around your issues with manpower or people power. So that may well come up again. Patsy, you want to say something about your new role?
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Stephen, as well, for setting that out. Clearly, delighted to be here working on this agenda. A key priority will be pulling together the new directorate so that we're really enmeshing growth and sustainability and delivering on that sustainable growth agenda going forward. Clearly, next year's IP will be slightly different. It will reflect that new directorate structure and the merging of those functions. But I'm really pleased to see the levels of investment going into these really important areas that do touch on the lives of probably all our citizens and residents in Hertfordshire. So I think that's probably where I'll leave it. But in terms of answering questions, I'll chip in and help where I can. But I think the team have probably got hopefully all the answers that you will need this morning. But I'm here to help should Stephen, Jonathan, or the team need my assistance. But I'll be watching with interest. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Colin, Hay, do you want to come in and say anything?
Thank you, Councillor. Probably just to introduce myself, Colin Haig. I'm the Director of Growth and Place, so I cover all of these service areas and happy to answer any questions you've got, but really enjoying the role. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Hertfordshire to do some really good work over the coming years. The county and the districts are working together. We're attempting to build good relationships with landowners and developers and pursuing that agenda of really good quality growth with the supporting infrastructure we know that communities want to make these places desirable to live or to accept into their communities.
Thank you for that. I think we've covered most of those bases now, and we can now move on to those identified key lines of inquiry. And no doubt members will have some additional items, which hopefully at the end we can go through. I'd like to aim for that. So when it does come to key lines of inquiry, I may well guillotine some of the conversations if I think it's going on too long on any particular one. If I can, we're going to start with the one which we put up front, which was growth. And growth is very, very important. You've mentioned it, officers mentioned it, and the portfolio holder has mentioned that Hertfordshire is looking to grow. Sharon, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, for those of us not so familiar with the process, and that might include members of the public, I wonder if you could just briefly explain how the process of these IP sessions works.
Certainly, I can give an outline of that, the detail being that these sessions are now, as we said, held, normally we hold them in public. We normally hold them at County Hall, where relative members of councillors sit in a room and go through the various portfolio budgets that have been presented and go through in detail the efficiencies they have in there, as well as the investments they have in there, both for capital and revenue, and ask relevant questions, pose relevant questions back to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, who then will judge how we take those forward, whether as take them as items for overview and scrutiny to consider, or whether they're pushed up to Cabinet for Cabinet to consider before it locks down the budget, which is then presented to full council for approval, adjustment and approval. So this is really the first stage of reviewing the budget in detail before it goes before Cabinet, if it's come from Cabinet, before it goes before up for council. So that's the sort of detail. Does that suit you, Sharon? Thank you. So I'm now going to start on the word growth, if I can. Paul, I know you had some concerns, not just about what's in this particular area of growth, but certainly around the concepts which are included in the documents we have in front of us. So, Paul Zed, do you want to come in for us, please?
Sure, thank you, Terry. Yeah, the question that's in the key lines of inquiry is one that I think is very pertinent, because Councillor Richard Roberts has outlined priorities of responsible and sustainable growth for the county. What are the main three priorities within this portfolio to fit in with this vision, especially the green agenda? Now, I have to say, one of the things that has become pretty apparent to me, there are two issues that I've come across that I want to ask about that have a direct bearing on that in the pack. So the two questions that come out of my reading of the pack are, on page 198, we have a series of key priorities for the portfolio for this coming IP period. However, on page 196, we have a summary of key priorities and programmes, and the two don't appear to be aligned. There are some differences, and they are significant differences between the two lists of key priorities. So what are our key priorities? What are the main three within this portfolio? And can we have some indication as to which one of those lists is the most up to date? The second question relates to the list on page 201 of how the portfolio reviewed its effectiveness, because I do note the mention about key capital schemes in the summary on page 197, Harlow, Gilston, Garden Town, and listings within here of a range of different major development and strategic development schemes. But I note that in that section 4, how the portfolio is reviewing its effectiveness, I do not see, other than a straightforward count of the number of net new market and affordable homes built, any key performance metric that relates to the development of those strategic projects. So there is no mention, for example, of intermediate goals and stages within the heart. There's no mention or strategic staged goals for Gilston Garden Town, for example. So I'd like to understand how the metrics as outlined in this pack actually relate to some of what I would consider really key priorities in this portfolio.
Thank you, Paul. So, who wants to handle that? Stephen, you want to handle that?
I'll start with that. Thank you. I mean, firstly, growth is important, as we all understand, and sustainable growth. And the fact that we've set a new sustainable growth department, I think, indicates the importance which the county is putting on that. And part of that, of course, is the relationship with districts and borough councils to influence their local plans, sites and policies. From what you're saying about Harlow and Hemel, of course, it's very early in the stage of their planning of those towns, particularly with Hemel. Harlow is a bit further advanced. So it is not, we are not in a situation yet where perhaps markers, as you say, Paul, as the development progress can be assessed. It's probably a bit too early to do that. But Colin, perhaps you'd like to come in a bit more on that.
Thank you, Steve. And yeah, I don't know which order you want me to take those, councillor, but I think the way I see it in terms of the role I'm being asked to do is, one, I need to make sure that the county's statutory planning functions run smoothly. So it's the base of the job in terms of handling planning applications that come into us that we are statutorily obliged to determine. So that side of things. The wider role, I think the priority is working early and productively with district councils in terms of that wider facilitation of good sustainable growth. So it's building those relationships with our officer and councillor colleagues early in the local plan process to debate policies, agree good agenda. So that would be my broad answer to that question.
Before you go on,
of monitoring those that are on the GRIP panel, you'll know that we put a quarterly.
You're cracking up, Colin.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I'll pause. I was waiting for a question to come in.
Yeah, no, you were very, very disjointed and broken up. I don't know whether it's your line or mine. I'm assuming from other comments that it's actually yours, at your end, but it's making it quite difficult to sort of grapple with what you were talking about. But I mean, just to come back on your answer to that, for example, one of the key intermediary objectives that you might, for example, consider would be achievement of I've forgotten the planning phraseology. The kind of mutual agreements between authorities as to what the process going forward is, and I've forgotten the name of the document now. But you know, there are clearly steps in the planning process where agreements are reached between different authorities as to who is responsible for what. And actually, you know, we don't have a metric in here that suggests that those are part of our demonstrable metrics that we've met the goals that we're attempting to reach.
I think what you might be referring to, I've just moved on to my phone now, so hopefully my reception is better. Let me know, please.
It is, yes.
We work with districts, so we have an engagement protocol document that we've recently updated and we have signed with all districts. So that sets out our broad way of engaging with districts on their local plans so that we are helpfully in the room assisting them as they make decisions, devise policies, consider the impact of growth in terms of traffic generation, education and pupil yield, those sort of things, and all the aspects we provide support for. We also work with them in terms of duty to cooperate. We have memorandums of understanding with a number of councils. I think that was the phrase you were looking for. Now, I think the answer is we work with districts and we pursue the best scenario based upon where they are in their local plan phase, what they think they need at the time, what we think we can help with. What I don't think it would be very easy to do is set targets, let's say, and say we want to sign 5 memorandums of understanding this year, because I don't know that how I'd set that target and whether I'd be able to achieve it there afterwards. So I think we're responsible. We work with the districts. I could certainly keep key metrics of how many memorandums of understanding we've signed each year, or statements of common ground with developers, or how many times we've responded to local plan consultations. But that would simply be a record of what has happened rather than setting an ambition or a level we wish to achieve in any given year, because we aren't in control of that agenda. It's the districts that are preparing their local plans. It's developers that are submitting the planning applications and districts are then determining. So the metrics I've been providing you for the GRIP panel up till now have been those that I do have some control over, how well we are determining county planning applications, how much money we've secured for Section 106, how well we're doing in terms of enforcement. What I was also planning to do at the end of the administrative year was prepare an annual monitoring report, which took a wider look at the number of homes that have been built, the number of affordable homes, some indicators on economy, society, environment, etc. This is towards the end of my first year in the job. So the intent is that annual monitoring report would come to you every year with some key metrics we could look at. And then over the coming years, we could compare how Hertfordshire is doing and hopefully identify trends, issues, ways we might be able to improve the quality of the planning service in Herts.
Colin, I think you've given it. Just answer one more if you can, please. Paul raised a question around disjointed data in the report on various pages around the objectives of the portfolio. Did you identify with those and those two different positions in the papers?
It would probably help to have examples, but as I see it, I've tried to define it. It's asked for priorities, it's asked for pressures, it's asked for projects and programs. So I've tried not to repeat myself in those and tried to split what we do into those different categories. So apologies if that's not come across clearly enough or any councillor thinks they conflict, but I've tried to say things once rather than multiple times in those categories that I've been asked to provide comment on.
Thank you for that. You want to add anything to that, Stephen?
No, I think as Colin said, he tried not to double up on things, but in the box on page 196, the key priorities and programs, I think you can take that as the main driving force of the service going forward.
Thank you. Paul? Very quickly, Paul, please.
Yeah. Okay. You asked me for a specific. The page on page, just as an example, it's not the only one. The very last bullet point: safeguard the interests of Hertfordshire in relation to development ambitions at Lewiston and Stansted airports. That doesn't appear in the list on page 198 to 199. Now, I could have missed it, but that's just one indication. Now, what I suspect is that one of these lists is older than the other. I wouldn't say they conflict. I think they're just perhaps potentially neither of them are complete. But one of the things that we'll come back to from our key lines of inquiry is the idea that we should have main priorities and subsidiary priorities, and I'm not seeing that in this list. I wonder whether that is something that we ought to do. Just to come back on one of the things that you did say, Colin, I don't think a straightforward count of things like memorandum of understanding or statements of common ground is what I'm looking for. I think those can be very small and very detailed, or they can be very large and very substantial. I think what I'm looking for is, if we're going to deliver the heart by a set date in the future, we know we must have a series of agreements with a series of organisations. Have we a table of what those agreements will need to be and which ones have we ticked off? I think that's a much more appropriate way of doing that.
Paul, I think I'm going to pause you there because I'm trying to link this back to the IP rather than what happens at the cabinet panels. Yeah, I think some of the poses you've raised there really could go to the cabinet panel on IPP and on this particular portfolio, GIP, and I think that the answers will probably come out from there. How it impacts on the budgets that I put forward to us, I can see some of them when it comes to how you identify the priorities of this particular portfolio. So it's recognised that perhaps what we try to do is go to the top, but certainly there's some which appear to be missing in one page versus the other, and that is something which I'll leave in the capable hands to be addressed. Yeah.
Thank you, Terry. May I just add on this portfolio, planning matters are changing very rapidly. There'll be a new planning bill coming out fairly shortly, and the service will react to the changes that come about. So it's difficult to put everything down in writing now. And of course, with Patsy, she may have slightly different directions in which she wants to go. But we are a changing department, and as planning laws change, and as new sites come forward and new developments come forward, and as district plans are agreed, we will have to keep agile so we can deal with those.
Most definitely. Thank you for that. I'm now going to move on to the next item we had, which was the LEPs and the demise of the LEPs. Marius, you want to come in and ask a question on the LEPs?
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I do. Stephen, there's been some publicity around the plans to scrap local enterprise partnerships. That's the LEPs, by the way, in case others don't know what that means. As part of levelling up, what are your plans to support the economic growth beyond these?
Thanks, Marius. I mean, we are very tight with the LEP at the moment, and they've prepared an economic recovery plan and associated plans for college and gene therapy, for example, and creative industries. But Herts County Council is working with partners to help improve and implement the cell gene therapy actions in Gullswood. And we're working with partners to support Sky Studios in Boreham Wood, Sunset Studios in Broxbourne. We're working with others on the Herts Innovation Quarter at Hemel Hempstead Maylands. We're working with Visit Herts to support the tourism sectors. We are working with LEP and implementing the 3.2 million sum of community renewal funding. And of course, Herts County Council has been resisting the Article 4 directives, which would cause office space to be lost and turned into housing. So there's a lot going on. And again, Colin, you may want to add to that, but there is much happening at the moment.
Yeah, I think in terms. Yeah, thank you. The LEP isn't going yet. There are rumours of it and talk about what may appear in the levelling up bill. But there may be alternatives. So at the moment, we continue to work very closely with them. We will look at what the future may hold if a levelling bill or something else appears in time. But I think the answer is, you know, they've been around 10 years. An awful lot has changed during that time. An awful lot of good work has gone on. A clear agenda has been set in terms of what Hertfordshire can do to improve its economic circumstances. That was in train anyway. COVID has hit that unexpectedly, and the LEP and partners have responded to that in terms of how to revive our town centres, the key sectors that hopefully hold a strong economic future for Hertfordshire, particularly cell and gene therapy in northern Hertfordshire, and creative industries and film studios in southern Hertfordshire. So we're pursuing that, as well as hopefully supporting all of the other industries that exist in Hertfordshire, and that relationship continues at the moment. That's probably the easiest response I can give you.
Thank you for that. I think when we come down to manpower, or person power, should I say, and how you're going to have people, because there's obviously a lot of things you need to do, as that came up earlier under Paul's comments as well. There's things that need to happen, and whether we've got resources to do it, which should be part of this budget process, we'll come on to if I can. I guess, does anyone else want to comment on that, Stephen? Or are you content with what Colin said?
Content with that. Sharon is indicating.
Yes, we'll pick up Sharon. You want to come in, Sharon?
Yeah, I hope I'm not torpedoing your process, Chair. I've got a question on this, if that's all right with you. There's a great deal of work that the Local Enterprise Partnership has done over recent years. You mentioned the COVID recovery plan, but there is so much else going on, including the skills development, the supporting and promoting of our sectors, which Stephen mentioned, both cell and gene therapy in the media and creative industries, the support for SMEs, the development of a very strong startup offer in the county, and I could go on and on, which I won't do. We do have a big question around what's going to happen to the Shared Prosperity Fund, where that will go. My question in terms of IP is how that resource is going to be developed for Hertfordshire. If the government decide they don't want to have local enterprise partnerships anymore, do we have the resource already to take on all of that that work, or is it something we're going to have to another thing we're going to have to lobby government for funding for?
I think again, because the situation hasn't changed yet, because LEPs exist, we carry on working with them. If the levelling up white paper or some other paper says something different, then I think we would all need to sit down and work out what that says, what scope there is for Hertfordshire, decide how it wants to establish itself in terms of statutory local authorities, the LEP and economic body. But because that agenda hasn't been set yet, it's something still available for us to debate.
Thank you. Patsy, you want to come in?
Would you mind if I just added to what Colin said? I think there's absolutely universal agreement across Hertfordshire that any change to the LEP, those functions of business support, sector support, investor support, skills are vital to the continuation of our economy, which, as you know, brings in 40+ billion a year to UK PLC. So there will be a follow-on plan worked up with the LEP. The County Council, you'll know from the IP papers, supports the LEP to the tune of 300,000 a year already. So we will find a way forward, and that's certainly something that, you know, there's been a commitment to. Those functions have to continue. So, but we are waiting to the end of this month for the white paper to see what the kind of the future direction of that is, as Colin and Stephen have both said. So I hope that reassures there will be a plan, absolutely, because those functions are too important for us not to have them continue.
Thank you, Patsy. I guess the question there is there's money in the kitty we put there in the budget to cover our support of the LEP and hopefully the continued support of something which comes afterwards. I mean, from an IP perspective, that's something which we are challenging and something you said is there. So that's crucially important. Thank you for that.
Sorry, Terry, it's not just about financial support. It's also about the input from our businesses in how we develop the economy in the county. So I just don't want to lose that point.
Yeah, I think that what I'm talking about there, Sharon, is that we have money in our kitty not to help those in terms of physical paying over cash, but particularly in helping them to do that role and responsibility which we have to support the local community and local enterprises physically rather than financially in many cases. And that's where we would need the resources to do that. And that's what the money will be spent on, a lot of it. Thank you for that. The next item on my list here was the Harlow and Gilston Garden Town. I'm not terribly sure if everybody recognise what a garden town is versus a garden city, perhaps like I do, but we've spoken a fair bit about what we're doing over there and how we're doing it. I'm going to ask Ken Crofton, who comes from that sort of part of the world, East Herts way. Ken, the question we had really was, how does HCC's financial commitment to the project compare to other authorities, was an example that came up here. What commitment do we have to this particular agenda? So, Ken, you want to come in and ask the question?
I'm sorry, I'm not prepared. I didn't get the briefing notes until
Ken, I'll come back to you because it's easy. It borders on that neck of the woods, so that's why I was coming over to you, really. But I guess the question really was around, and I say we answered much of this already, is we'll be able to provide some more details and background for the capital commitment with relation to the Harlow Gilston Garden Town. The IP Pact does not go into any detail about the only capital project. So perhaps we need some more detail around what we've got committed there and what we've got committed for the future.
Thank you. I'll start on that then, Chairman. There is no direct capital commitment from Hertfordshire County Council. We are in a contract with Homes England for 171 million of housing infrastructure grant funding to build the infrastructure to enable the development. We have a back-to-back agreement with the Essex County Council and Property Funding Partnership, and Hertfordshire County Council is employing staff by the HIG and HE capacity funding. Money is spent and reclaimed on a monthly basis. So as far as capital goes, it's not from us. I mean, again, Colin, if you want to add anything on to that.
Yeah, just to add to that, if that's all right. It's a rather unique situation. We've got a contract with Homes England. So there is 171 million of funding available to deliver the infrastructure that supports Gilston. So that's mostly road links and bridges and sustainable transport and various other packages. We're working with all of the partners in that area. So as that infrastructure is built by Essex County Council, by PFP, who are the current landowner and developer for Gilston, they will seek that funding from the county, and then the county will seek that funding from Homes England and then disperse it as it's received. So there's no direct capital contribution from the county to enable this. But we are facilitating capital investment in that area via that arrangement. So rather unique. We have people in the room to do that. Their costs are funded from HIG or from Homes England capacity funding. So that's the arrangement. It may well be something, if members want a more detailed explanation of, we can organise a workshop in future. But that's the gist of the arrangement to help facilitate that growth at Gilston.
Thank you. Jeff, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I think actually Colin's probably just answered my question, because all I was going to say was that I mean, it's hell of a commitment for 171 million in infrastructure. It's an absolutely massive project, and working with the 4 different authorities, that must be a hell of a challenge, something that probably we haven't come across before as a county council. So my question was going to be, you know, how was that going to be managed? But I think you've probably answered the question. And I was also concerned, 171 million, you know, so how do we get that funding back? And you've answered that question. So we're putting the money up front, basically, aren't we? And we will get it back eventually from the developer.
No, we're not putting the money up front. It's sat in Homes England's bank account in essence, and as it's been spent by other parties, we draw it down from Homes England on their behalf and pass it on to the whoever has spent it. So we're in essence a middleman of some sort. But at the time, we were the only authority that could bid for that money and secure it, and therefore we played that role to help enable the wider Harlow-Gilston project.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Paul, you want to come in?
Yeah. I mean, just to ask, I mean, are we in the situation where all that money is committed to particular development projects? Is all the land ownership nailed down? You know, do we have agreements to deliver all that infrastructure, or are we still in the process of developing that? If we are in the position where stuff is actually contracts for the development and infrastructure works are happening, have we agreed those contracts? So that's the kind of thing that I'm indicating as potentially a list of intermediary objectives in terms of that particular project, and not just that particular project. You could do that with other projects as well, to give us some idea and some indication of, you know, progress and advancement of these particular projects as we go forward. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
We have a head of service for this function. We have the original contract with Homes England that had all of the projects and all of the anticipated costs. Now, you'll appreciate, hopefully, it's complex. It involves the planning system, and the planning system doesn't always run quite as smoothly as we might like. Really? So it is having to flex in response to changing circumstances. There are planning applications sat with East Herts that have yet to be determined for new bridges and for the outline planning permission. That will dictate the following timetable, but we're keeping a very close eye on that. We're updating the programme for all of that. Not something I could sensibly run through with you now, but hopefully the reassurance, we have people dedicated to running that programme, working with the other partners, with the developers, with Essex, to make sure that it can be delivered, and liaising with Homes England to maintain that contract. And I can certainly have a look at how we might pick out some key metrics from that to reassure all of you that it's running as well as we can possibly make it.
I just wonder, Colin, whether that is rather an operational matter rather than a strategic matter, and perhaps outside of the IP process, and could be picked up elsewhere.
I think it probably should go back at the panel stage. The panel should be monitoring this as well, rather than annually at an IP review. I think as long as we're convinced, we need to be convinced that there is funding in the budget to cover our end of our commitments, or that being people or capital, whatever. That's really the question we pose here. The detail behind it should go back to the particular IP, to particular cabinet panel, who can then ask those sorts of questions and get those sorts of answers. And if they're not convinced, they of course can refer it back to scrutiny even when we get further down the road, perhaps. Yeah?
I think that's absolutely right, Terry. But I would reiterate that raising it at the IP scrutiny is, I think, an appropriate point, because it gives you the opportunity to step back and look at the strategic direction of the portfolio. And actually, there is no sensible opportunity within the panel process to do that. I think this is the opportunity to do that, which is why I think it's appropriate to raise it now.
Thank you very much indeed for raising it. The next thing we have down on as a key line of inquiry was savings and efficiencies, a couple on there which will need to be made clearer. Do you want to take this one, Paul de Court?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, it's in two parts. So looking at the financials here, I want to understand firstly with NE6, this is page 205, whether we're talking about savings in terms of cost reduction or income increase in terms of a net effect. So are we charging more now than we were for the PPAs? Are we going to do more of them? Or are we making cost savings? And if we're making cost savings, how are they going to be arrived at? And just as a follow-up to that, my thoughts is it seems that a lot of this, if it's not cost savings, is not under our control. And what confidence can we have that this can be achieved?
Thoughts, comments, Colin?
Planning performance agreements, in essence, are where we provide pre-application advice to developers. So the assumption we have made, which I think is reasonable, we have a set price of £100 an hour that we seek to charge. Where we have a big developer, so let's take Places for People looking to build, a planning application for 10,000 homes at Gilston, for example, we will do our best to set what we think is an amount, and we may set it as a single fee, or we may agree a monthly rate, depending on the size of the development, the likely complexity of that. And that will come in and that will help us to fund the officers that then provide the advice and work with the districts and all of the other problem solving that comes with those sites. Because we anticipate through looking at local plans that exist for Hertfordshire, there are going to be more larger sites in forthcoming years. We've therefore reasonably, in my mind, anticipated larger amount of money coming in through the PPA process, the pre-application process. But it's very difficult to be absolute because we don't know at what point a developer might approach us. We don't know their timescale for submitting that planning application. Sometimes they come in saying it'll be 3 months and actually it's 6 or 9 or 12. So we've had to make a judgment that planning performance income will increase, but very difficult to put a precise amount on that. The way I see it is that money coming in is used to fund those officers to provide that service for the benefit of a better planning service, better sustainable growth as the outcome. So it fits into that category rather than an absolute income that I can precisely define how much it will be.
Okay, thank you. So it is sort of income related. So if I just move on to NE7 there, which obviously is linked, where would, with the pressure that district council are under, very, very tight budgets, I would imagine that they will need to feel very confident when they are contracting out, if you like, to you for this advice that you're going to provide, that it's going to be delivered, because they're going to want to avoid any sort of duplication as a safety net, because Herts County Council can't deliver that advice in an appropriate timescale for them. So just wondered what reassurance you could give on that in terms of us actually being able to win that income from those that SCA service level agreements from them.
Yeah, sure. We've been doing this for a number of years. I used to be the head of planning at Welwyn Hatfield and purchased this service from the county council, because if you need ecological advice on a site or archaeological advice, that information is held centrally. It's easy to acquire that way, and it saves having to employ your own ecologist or archaeologists and the lack of resilience if they move on. So it was always very useful to be able to turn to this service, and I think it's 8 of the local authorities in Hertfordshire currently acquire from it, and we set fees based on how much they've used in previous years, how much they anticipate they will need in coming years for landscape, archaeology and ecology advice. The government's recently published the Environment Bill, and that introduces something called biodiversity net gain, and it means developers have to try and increase the amount of biodiversity from their developments, either on site or potentially off site. And we've been working with districts for the last year to debate how we might do that as a county-wide solution and make investments in land to improve its biodiversity value. So we're hoping and expecting that there will be some service level agreements signed for that. There's work to be done because we need to make a judgment as to how much that might be. But I think the fact that the service we have provided for the last, I don't know how many years, but let's say at least 5 years, probably longer than that, has been running smoothly. We have been able to keep recruiting and provide that service and offer that reassurance to districts that if they need that advice, it's available. What we're looking to do to add a bit more resilience to that is build some framework contracts with consultants. So if we do find ourselves in a position where it's difficult to recruit ecologists or archaeologists, we have framework agreements in place with the private sector. We can turn to them and acquire the advice from there. So that adds hopefully reassurance to all the districts. If they sign that service level agreement with us and they're expecting that advice, we can provide it.
Thank you. I think that's very clear.
Thank you.
Very clear indeed. Thank you. The next thing we had on our key line inquiry was changes in planning law and systems, and I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. Jeff Jones, you want to ask that question, that key line inquiry of officers, please?
Yeah, happy to. I think the concerns there is what are the plans to meet the impact of the changes in planning law. I suppose this refers to the white paper that's due. What plans will be in place for the potential impact of these changes?
Thanks, Jeff. I'll start with that. Firstly, it's difficult to put any plan in place to deal with the changes because we just don't know what they're going to be. You will recall that there was an original paper last year which everybody was looking at and wondering what to do. And then the Secretary of State changed. We've got different ministers dealing with it now. And we don't know the direction of travel on this. It could be similar to the previously suggested one, or it could be something quite different. After the amount of fuss, I think, on the original one, there have been indications that this one may be watered down, but we just don't know yet. And I think it would be probably wrong of us to go chasing in one direction or another until we know a bit further. But again, Colin, you may have more to add to that.
Yeah, I think certainly we're keeping a close eye on the planning press to see what the rumours are. There was a radical change proposed to the planning system that would have affected us and all of the districts and all of our interactions. It's not so clear that that level of radical change will appear in the planning bill that we're expecting now, but it's possible. We know what the changes might be. We're anticipating thinking about how we might have to engage, how we might have to change our own services in terms of the statutory planning functions we do, writing the minerals plan, determining planning applications, and how we might have to work with districts, particularly things if there are changes to the Section 106 regime, how we secure funding for for transport, for education. We would obviously need to respond quickly to that. There will be time. It won't be published and then change the planning system the following day. So there will be time to think about how we want to change, how we need to change. Occasion there is new burden funding that comes with these sort of changes, so that may offer opportunities. Certainly, and I think we probably all agree with this, there's merits in the planning system becoming more digital rather than, you know, A4 sheets of paper stuck on lampposts. So we'll be looking at that, and if the government introduce a nationalised system, we'll be able to hook into whatever that is. And we will reorientate as we need to, but I think everyone's ready and expecting that change. It's not going to come as a surprise, and then it would just be to debate with partners, with councillors, quite how we want to set ourselves up as a county council and how we want to work together in Hertfordshire through the Growth Board, HIP and the other forums we have to have that debate.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I guess that one of the areas of concern we do have is that the roles and responsibilities of us versus the districts and boroughs may well change, as they changed before when the whole planning process was turned upside down, when we had more responsibility for certainly county-wide planning. So whether it goes back that direction, which could have a big impact on what we've got in our budget here, but that is not, I don't think that's at least 2-3 years down the road, and therefore will probably come out later in the budgetary process. Do you think that's a fair reflection?
I think if there's really fundamental change, then we'd reflect it in future IP requests and explain to you how that was changing. Yeah, but I don't think I could reasonably come to you and say I need, you know, X amount of money for this change, because we simply don't know what that's going to be at the moment. And we have people in the room making the current planning system work. We would have people in the room to make a revised planning system work, and then we can look at the detail once we know what that detail is.
Thank you very much. Paul, you want to come back?
Yeah, I suppose it's a question around contingency planning going forward. It's something that just occurred to me, and it is probably of interest to more than one person on this panel. The current regime for local plan delivery suggests that if you do not have an extant local plan by the end of, I think it's the end of 2023, the Secretary of State will potentially direct against you. There is a suggestion some while ago that the Secretary of State might look to the county to put in place an alternative regime in that instance. Have we got a contingency plan in case we are asked to do that?
No, in essence, I know that was one of the things the government said it could do to help create local plans. I haven't heard that suggestion in any number of years. The example we have at the moment is St Albans, where they've not been able to get a plan progressed to adoption. And in that scenario, they are meeting regularly with government ministers to debate how they would achieve that. So the example I suspect you are talking about, well, in Hatfield will probably find it might end up in that situation if what you're worried about does happen, that you would be meeting with government ministers on a regular basis as to how you would improve the local planning situation in that area, and any other authority that finds itself in that scenario. But from what I've seen in planning press of late, I don't think that responsibility would be given to the county council on behalf of a district.
That's really interesting. Thank you, Colin. It reassures me that at least at a county level, we don't necessarily need a plan for that in place. So that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I mean, I could throw North Herts in there as well, which is the inquiry's been going now for 2 years, and it's still in abeyance. So there's local plans are very much up in the air. Some are really locked down, some are nowhere near where they need to be, and others are sort of in the process. And
yeah, I mean, it's not just St Albans and it's not just Welwyn Hatfield, is it? There are more than one authority that might get tripped up by that particular deadline if the changes to the planning regime don't include a change to that, which they may do. Who knows?
In place, we don't know that, and that's what Colin's saying. Until we know that their direction of travel, and putting resources in our budgets for it was something which will come further down the road. So thank you.
I think also, Chairman, if I may add, I think, Colin, it's right that only 3 out of the 10 districts and boroughs have a plan in place at the moment.
I think it's 5.
It's 5 districts have the old style core strategies. I think 3 have more modern local plans. 3 are at examination stage, and 4 are starting new local plans. Is the current mix? Yeah.
So
plus, the southwest and the northeast are also looking at joint strategic plans for the longer term. Now, one of the things the white paper may do is put more emphasis on strategic planning at a greater geography, and we're prepped for that scenario already.
Well, I think we need to be, because certainly planners do not recognise district and borough boundaries. They, as we hear with, good classic being Harlow and Gilston, of course, the boundaries there between districts, boroughs and counties don't exist as far as planning are concerned. Planners are concerned, planning companies are concerned. So I think there'll be a lot more of that cross-border stuff. We're seeing it certainly up my neck of the woods, cross-border. So I think it's something which we have to make sure that we are in on, because we will be perhaps the middleman, shall we say, or perhaps the arbitrator between some of these things. But that's something which we will not need to include just yet in our budget, but we may do in the future when the goalposts get moved. So thank you for that. The next thing we have on our key line of inquiry is something which is working with the districts and boroughs and our neighbours, and we've mentioned it a couple of times. And I'm sorry, but my phone is ringing, which I'll turn off. So Sharon, you want to take this one for me, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I won't share the pain of our local plan, although we do have one in place now, but it took a very long time and it was not without its complexities. And, you know, it did, as Colin will be more than aware, you know, that the county had to, as well as the borough, had to extend extensive resources in making sure we got through our plan process. The more complex these processes get, the more resources we all need to put into making sure they happen. Also, you know, public engagement is not cheap either. So rightly, we do need to engage the public in these processes. Right, on to districts and boroughs. Hertfordshire is almost unique in the UK in having a very successful partnership approach to working together on growth and infrastructure. We've done a lot of work, particularly in the last 2 years, on the Herts Growth Board, and that's been very successful. But a great deal of the future working together is predicated on that Herts Growth Board and on getting a Herts Growth deal. And if we don't get that, my question is, what plans do we need to make? Because we've got a significant infrastructure deficit to meet the Herts Growth needs, and the growth deal would help support that. And the funding for sustainability as well would concern me if we don't get a growth deal in Hertfordshire. Some of the big changes we need to make to drive the green agenda and to get to net zero will be difficult to do. And I wonder what plans we need to put in place. So have we got contingency planning to support? We'd hope we get an answer about the growth deal. We haven't had one yet. What contingency plans will we need to make to cover the very significant costs we're facing of the growth agenda in Hertfordshire?
Thoughts, please.
I wonder whether Patsy might be best placed to start the answer to this question, given the growth board role.
Thank you. Thanks, Sharon, and also for the reference to all the work we've done through the growth board, pulling that together. And certainly we've been very much looking at these issues that are bigger than any single authority can deal with and need to be tackled in a partnership way through the work of the growth board. A key theme has been focus on trying to achieve a growth deal, as you've said, but also the self-sufficiency, bearing in mind the way that funding is being distributed at the moment and the priorities away from home counties geographies. I think it's fair to say at the moment, but that may change. We are developing an approach that looks at what are the options through using our own resources locally, including SILS, Section 106, HIG, that's already been referenced at Harlow Gilston, bidding for funding through Homes England. So there's a range of pursuing what funding options are available from government, but also through the Growth Board. But on behalf of all the partners, we've produced an investment strategy for Hertfordshire, looking at bringing investment here. The LEP are investing in investor support activities, which the Growth Board is also supporting, to make sure that our key sectors, the skills around that and the jobs that come with that, and the infrastructure that will be supported by that are also part of the plan. You'll see from the IP that there is investment in growth and sustainability, and one of the tasks that I need to take forward is paying for this post, paying for this extra capacity through pursuing funding. So we need to make sure that we are securing what public and private sector funding potentially could come to Hertfordshire to help pay for that infrastructure. We probably need to update our infrastructure picture because the 6 billion figure is from 2017-18, and it's a dynamic situation. So there are various things through the Growth Board work and the work of this panel that will make sure we're understanding what that picture looks like, that we're engaging with government and building on those relationships with Homes England and other bodies. It was mentioned earlier about the successful community renewal funding bids that were put forward, and we'll obviously need to see what happens through the shared prosperity funding. So it will be a range of working together, seeking funding, making sure that we are attractive to investors and that we have the right kind of projects. The heart was referenced earlier, and we'll need to have a clear funding dialogue with government and other investors to support the heart, which has a price tag of around 2 billion. On the plus side, we've obviously got a very buoyant and healthy growth needs in this county. So we have that option to negotiate and ensure that we achieve the infrastructure we need through the development process. It's the gap funding above and beyond that we need to make sure that we're looking after, and we do have a multifaceted approach, I think, to trying to deal that. But that's not to say it won't be challenging, because it is a big price tag, as you'd said, Sharon. But I think the joint work we've done with the LEP, the Growth Board partners, working into government, pursuing a county deal and growth deals, we are using all the levers available to us to try and secure as much infrastructure and other funding as we can.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer, Patsy. And my main concern in this is that with district budgets so stretched, and I don't think there's anybody on this call that would argue with that, and the county's budget is under considerable pressure too, it will be a significant task to make sure that we bring in the money for this growth. And some of the projects in the Growth Board, the digital, making sure Hertfordshire is digitally enabled, the town centres work, the housing and new settlements, the sector work that we've already mentioned on this call, as well as the delivery of infrastructure. And you've already mentioned the Community Renewal Fund, which has given us some funding for community wealth building, which helps share the prosperity we've got in Hertfordshire around a much wider picture. It's really hard to see how that will be delivered without significant funding input. Our argument has been all the way along that Hertfordshire can contribute to the wealth of the country and supporting other areas where the economy isn't as buoyant as ours, if we're given this support and help. So thank you for that input. Can I just ask one other? It's a different question altogether, if that's all right, Chair, but it's just for Colin, really. And that is that with all this growth going on in Hertfordshire, it does require significant contribution from the county in terms of both, you've already spoken about supporting the local plan delivery, but in the individual, for example, if you've got a big infrastructure project, you need county's contribution. I know from our own experience here in Stevenage, the town centre has required significant input from the county. You've already mentioned the shortage of planning officers in the country, and if we're going to go into joint strategic planning on new settlements, for example, that will require input from county officers. What's your assessment of where we are in terms of the resources you've got available to provide a speedy and thorough response to some of these demands that are being placed on your team?
Thoughts?
Okay. Yeah, this looks like it goes into the next key pressure, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's an overlap there in the next one, which was
yeah, that's quite happy. I'll take that. I mean, I checked the other day to report to Grip Panel, and it was an 8% vacancy rate for my service at that point, which is quite a luxury compared to roles I've been in the past, where it's been much higher and you've had to turn to consultancies, to agency staff, etc. But I'm aware within that list we have some hard to fill roles where we've advertised a number of times and been unsuccessful. We all know that planners are in short supply. I've seen some really good people move to the private sector recently that hoped would stay in the public sector. We know that when we do advertise, quite often we simply take from one another and redistribute what we already had in some other combination within the county. So it's something I'm alert to. You'll be aware that the county is going through the Future Workforce Programme, and that may offer new terms and conditions and salaries that make us an attractive place to work. We will work with the districts as best we can. Hopefully the culture is right in terms of supporting districts. Having done it at a district level, having county officers supporting with you, having that common understanding and working together as best as you can, recognising we have different employers and some different aspirations, but hopefully that working together is achieving success at both the basic local planning application level and where you're entering into project work like the regeneration of Stevenage, Watford, Hatfield, loads of examples where we're hopefully contributing from a planning, a growth and a transport perspective, and increasingly with the change directorate from a sustainability perspective. The IP bid adds some new officers to the team, I hope, to help with the strategic planning, and that bleeds into the project work quite easily. Once you've had people involved in the pre-app stage, they're very well placed to help with the planning application. They're then well placed to help with the delivery and understanding of the context. So I hope that we have enough people in the room. We're anticipating more sites, more complexity. And we will work and find the best way of making that difference with the people that we have in the room, make sure we have good quality, make sure we're training them, make sure we're building up their experience, giving them those opportunities. So I think we're set well for what comes ahead. And as we've said, if the planning system changes, if the rate of growth accelerates even more than we've anticipated, then, the IP process is available in the future years. Or we look at where we're distributing our resources and having to focus more on those core priorities.
Thank you for that.
Can I just have a quick supplementary to that? So when your teams need the support of, for example, highways officers or education officers to do the response to planning things, is there enough resource in, I know it's not strictly on this portfolio, but you can't do it without them. Is there enough resource in those areas as well to put to these planning assessments to enable you to give a quick answer, Colin? And the second part of it is in social work, when we had a shortage of social workers in Hertfordshire, we had a programme where we effectively grew our own social workforce. This does leak into the next question, Chair, so forgive me, but is there an opportunity to do that in relation to planning people who we need to meet that planning need?
Yeah, absolutely, to that second.
Because we're going to duck on the last one as well. I think we've covered the last one, which was staffing. So if you could briefly just respond to Sharon's comments, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. On that second point, we have apprentices, we have a graduate programme, we have a career grade scheme. So all of those things are designed to catch people, out of uni, starting a new career, wherever it might be, and to grow them to make sure they go, I could be here, a significant number of years, learn an awful lot through that process. And that's absolutely what we want to achieve. We've got links with colleges, we've got links with the University of Hertfordshire that now has a planning programme as well, and a new professor. And we work closely with the Highways Department, with the Education Service, etc., to make sure they're able to respond to planning applications. I can't answer that wider question. I'm sure they are anticipating it through their IP bid processes. I've not been through absolutely what they're asking for, but at the moment it is working. We're able to provide that advice and work with the districts.
I think, if I may just add on that, Colin, I think one of the difficulties in raising our own staff is that we train them to the highest standards. And once they get to that standard, they're very attractive to other counties and boroughs and districts, which is a problem. The other thing I'd say is that the growth agenda for Hertfordshire is actually pretty exciting. And for a lot of planners, they may well think, well, this looks a good place to work. There are things going on here which are not unique, but are unusual in the southeast, and they're worth joining the council so that you have an opportunity to work on some of these very interesting projects, and I think that will help.
Yeah, and COVID, for example, has changed where we're getting applicants from. So you're getting people much further away. And instinctively, your answer is, well, are they going to move? But actually, if you look at it and say, well, they're not doing something that requires them to do site visits every day, perhaps it doesn't matter if they're in Northumberland or Scotland or somewhere. So it is changing the employment market and the opportunities available to us, as well as more people thinking, well, actually, I don't need to travel into London. You know, my lifestyle has changed. Maybe I could work in essentially the suburbs rather than heading into the city every day. So we are seeing some new types of applicants and new interest. But as we know, it's a fragile situation. I could be coming to you in a couple of months saying, you know, the vacancy rate is much higher. So I'm alert to the risk of it, and that we need to be agile and ready to attract through whatever means we can.
Thank you for that. Paul, you want to come in briefly, please?
Yeah, it was actually in relevance to that point. The question that I had for you, Colin, is do you feel that there are potentially more efficiencies to be had from the planning service, were the service not to be distributed across at least 3 portfolios? I'm aware that they're within the same directorate, but at the minute we have the growth and your team within growth, infrastructure and planning portfolio. We have transport and other infrastructure planning within the highways and transport portfolio. And of course, we have the minerals and waste planning all within the environment portfolio. Would it be more efficient and more effective and consolidate the planning functions in a way that meant that you had a more robust and reliable team were they to all be pulled together?
Colin, for that, you've got 30 seconds.
Okay, I was wondering if that was more a question for a councillor than an officer.
It is. So Paul's there. Go to you if I can, please. Yeah, I guess.
It is. There is a strategic question there too, but I think the question is, from an officer's perspective, are there potentially efficiencies there that would be advantageous to make that suggestion worth considering from a strategic level?
It's the waste and minerals plan reports to the environment portfolio, and some of the strategic planning functions report to the highways portfolio. So it's not a vast amount to have to contemplate. It's not unusual for officers to report to more than one portfolio. So it's not a fundamental challenge to the service, but a judgment could be made. There are other ways of distributing that would be simpler lines of communication, but I won't comment on that. What we are doing that might be of interest, a wider question to that, is the HIP group, so Hearts Infrastructure Planning portfolio, which brings together all of the executive members for planning from around the county, is looking at staffing, planning, resource opportunities. We're going to have a conversation about what other things might be possible. Some of those will be challenging potentially, but that conversation is going to take place. The planning bill again may throw up some suggestions in that regard as well, but we are looking at that at a county level. But yeah, hopefully that's a half answer.
Thank you very much. Jan, you want to come in?
Yeah, mine's a very quick one. You mentioned, it's been mentioned several times that there's you're 8% down on planning officers. I just wondered what that translated to in actual numbers.
We've got about 60 staff, so I think it's less than 10 staff. I think I don't know the precise numbers offhand. I could get a structure chart, but it's that sort of order, and that's either because they are being churned at the moment, people are leaving, and we will recruit and hopefully be successful. A handful of those are where they're more persistent, hard to fill roles. So there are a few of those that we've struggled with for well over a year now to find the right person.
I guess the question it begs is, do we think that what we're paying is about the right level, or are we underpaying our staff? I'm not saying we are, but are we underpaying our staff and therefore losing them to neighbours?
There are market supplements attached to some of the roles, and that's being looked at as part of the future workforce. So I don't know what that will come out with, but certainly later in the year, as I understand, there will be some thoughts on what would be the right salary for planners, and that's been tested against other local authorities in the area. So it is being benchmarked.
Yeah, of course, we always have London as well, which changes this. Nigel, you want to come in?
Yes, I would like to just follow up on this. I have had the comment back from a number of different areas in the council of staff shortages. We can't get the people we need to pay them more, etc. I would want to be able to see that we're actually doing a proper development and apprenticeship and graduate scheme for all these shortage areas. And if there is severe shortages, then we should increase the number of graduates on the basis a lot more of them were going to leave, and actually create junior roles which people can move through. Ideally, a combined effort with the districts and ourselves, because they've all got the same problem. And if you can offer an apprenticeship where people will actually move around the county and the district councils, potentially also with neighbouring authorities like London. And if there is a continuous shortage, if we're just training for the private sector, we'll train more, because they can still do work when they are in a junior role. They can still contribute to these things. They can be exposed to it. And then at the end of the day, you will have expanded the market, you'll have expanded the number of professionals in those areas, and therefore you'll be able to control salaries more because there'll be more choice. That is the whole thing.
I appreciate the point you're making there, which is a very valid point. I'm not terribly sure it's going to impact on what we're doing here, but certainly the more we can do to recruit. And I know that, for example, we struggled here with having apprentices to support this process. Even we had to bring in officers rather than the apprentices. So it does go to show that during the COVID period, there was issues around getting those people into appropriate positions. So I hope that goes away.
Can I just make one final point? I would hope in future years to see budget provision for this type of service in the future, and actually have a proper programme. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. Sharon, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one on what one of Colin's responses was, that are we paying market supplements for planners at the moment? Do we need them? And what financial planning's been done to, in case we need them for the future? I know that if you can't get people to do this work, sometimes we have to take agency staff. Sometimes market supplements are cheaper than agency, sometimes they're more. So I think from a IP and a financial point of view, these are really key issues.
Yeah, we do pay market supplements at the moment. As I understand, the future workforce programme will look at arrangements where hard to fill posts might attract a higher salary, a market supplement. Again, I don't know the numbers on that yet, but that's certainly being looked at. Yeah, it's a factor. I think what we always need to bear in mind, if we take the county-wide view of things rather than just the Hertfordshire County Council view of things, we need to make sure that there is some commonality of salaries rather than any one of our 11 authorities being the best employer for planners or engineers or whoever, and everyone shifts in that direction and then salaries go up and everyone redistributes themselves. So I think we do need to think about that, and that relates to benchmarking against London, against the private sector, against the places where we know people are going. But yeah, all of these complicated factors to consider. What I would say about the previous comment is absolutely we're looking at an apprenticeship and a graduate programme. What we always have to be careful of, if you have planners who are towards the limits of their capacity, trying to cover as much ground as possible, and suddenly you say to them, I need you to line manage 5 graduates or apprentices, that is quite a task to do that, particularly in COVID times when they need direct attention. You need them in the office. So there is always that factor to consider if we're going to have a very large apprenticeship programme, the line management, the learning that they need to really develop their careers. So at the moment, it's more modest. It's 1 or 2 distributing around the 2 new departments, so they get experience in planning highways. And they may not know what they want to do, and that means they can say, well, actually, I'm really enjoying flood risk or engineering or planning or some component of planning, and we can attract them to where they want to be. But absolutely, it's something that's happening around Hertfordshire. We want to really build links with the colleges and the universities where we have a chance to get people some work experience, attract them in that way, and potentially new careers. You know, it's an interesting career. It's not, you know, it's about judgment and competencies and characteristics and the way your brain works as much as it is sometimes about having been involved in, you know, geography from an early age or environmental planning. So there's potential to attract people from a range of different sectors that may not have considered it. It's really about getting the job in front of them and getting that spark in their brain to go, oh, this could be interesting. And
okay, thank you for that. We're going to move. We've spoken a fair bit about staffing, which was going to be Colette's question. But Colette, you've got your hand up. You want to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. And I guess the number of contributions on this, yes, it was my question, but hey ho, reflect the importance of staffing to what we do. I mean, it's fundamental in underpinning the success of the whole of the growth agenda. And I guess that the fact that we are engaged in this growth agenda, we're getting the funding in from national government as well, shows how successful Hertfordshire has been at implementing measures such as this. And it's because we've older members of the panel, longer serving, thank you, members of the panel, will know that we already had a good track record in many of the suggestions put forward, like, you know, in-house training and so on. And I guess the secret of the success of what we've done in the past and taking that forward in the future to cope with these new challenges is to make sure that we do have contingency funding to help implement areas where there are specific staff shortages. Colin, you mentioned that we had an 8% overall vacancy rate, and I did wonder whether that's a blanket figure, but was there a particular area where we are glaringly short of staff, and what we are doing to address that? You mentioned 10 members of planning as one example, and other panel members have commented on the fact that we are, of course, it's a shrinking pool of expertise that is required because Great Britain is a growth economy. If you look at our international figures, our economy is growing where many are not, and that's reflected, I think, when you see the many towns and villages in Hertfordshire throughout the county who have got ambitious building programmes. The expertise is there. Can we, as a county council, help coordinate that more so that we are the overlaps are shrunk so that we do better with what we've already got, and that's in terms not just of personnel but of funding, and that's where we have to look to our relationships with the districts and boroughs. I think I'll hold it there, Chairman, if I may.
A very valid point you make there. I think there's a lot of work we need to do. Certainly, interacting people are very important to us. Our most important asset we have in Herts County Council, and yes, programmes, and no doubt human resources team are looking into that as well. of how we handle the future in terms of making sure we have people coming through the systems. I think we'll leave it at that if I can. Ken, for the final person, would you like to come in unbelievably briefly, please, Ken? I'm sorry, but we're getting...
I'll be brief. I'm just confirming what everybody said, but Nigel Taylor's comments, I think we tended to bat them away, but if we're going to take anything away from this IP process, we have to understand that the future employees are really important. Is that my system breaking, Dylan?
We can just about hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I've been thrown. I mean, with our growth, we're going to have these apprentices, but the big problem is with highways, with drainage engineers, with planning, everybody. We've got to have a much bigger emphasis on a unified training program across the county with all our districts. It's absolutely critical that we get the universities involved in training. We have perhaps even a salary agreement with other district councils, and we have everybody providing apprentices into the scheme, so we have a big pot. It's critical. I mean, county council is a great place to work. We've got to pay the right money. I mean, I've been without a highways locality manager now for 6 months, and but now the manager's leaving. That was the assistant without 6 months, but the manager's now leaving as well. We've got to replace these people, and we've got to attract them by either good salaries. Go out and find them. It's got to happen.
Thank you for that, Ken. I think I'll leave it on the capable hands of to handle that. And it not only applies to this particular portfolio, I'm sure, as you say, it applies to highways, and I know it applies to finance as well. So I'll leave that in the capable hands of the human resources team. I'm going to pause there for a second and say, we have now gone through the key lines of inquiry as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, we are running about 10 minutes behind schedule, but I'm accepting that. So really, I think I'm opening it up for anyone else wishes to make any contribution. Any other member wishes to make a contribution and ask a question, specific questions. If you can raise your hand, I will take you and ask those questions. But that is only going to last a maximum of 10 minutes. So please, if you could raise your hand if you have any other issue you wish to raise regarding this particular portfolio as far as the IP is concerned. Right, first and foremost, Jan, can you come in, please?
Thank you. Yeah, when I read through the papers, the thing that struck me was on page 196, and then it is repeated in the detail on page 198 and 200. In the key priorities and programs, it keeps using the word contribute. I find that quite sort of concerning, that there's no a contribution to something. Could be one email, or it could be 10 people working full time on a job, and I just find that it's a little bit woolly, and I just wondered if that could be tightened up in any way.
Yeah, can certainly look at that. I mean, I think I've chosen contribute as a verb because it doesn't say, because we're not in charge of that. Generally, it's a district or it's a developer or a landowner that is leading the intent and the timetable. Our role is often to be involved, to facilitate, to support, rather than us having that statutory role ourselves or leading that. So very happy to hear suggestions for other verbs that you think better encapsulate and show our intent and desire and willingness and energy to be involved in those sort of projects.
I think that's a very valid point you make there. That yes, we sometimes we lead and sometimes we contribute, and you've tried to differentiate between the two. So thank you for doing that. Paul, you want to come in? Paul D.
Yep. Quick question. Page 202. One of our key pressures and challenges. There's a reference to risk of failing to maintain a 7-year land bank. I want to know if that's a financial risk or a delivery risk or both.
That relates to the minerals and waste plan, so that goes to the environment portfolio later today. But one of the tasks set by government is to have a 7-year land bank of mineral and gravel supply, sand and gravel supply. And if not, we are more susceptible to speculative planning applications. So it's something we'll be considering writing the new minerals and waste local plan.
Thank you.
Which comes later in the IP. Yeah. Thank you for that, Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question about the mention of the HART system, the support for the infrastructure for HART in there. I've got no quibble with the HART transit system. It's very imaginative and you know, would take us a long way forward. My concern is that there is only one infrastructure project mentioned by name. We have a huge digital deficit in Hertfordshire which needs addressing, which we've been looking at on both the LEP and the Herts Growth Board. And we also have significant infrastructure required to deliver net zero. Should we really be focusing on one infrastructure project, or should the love be shared a bit around some of these other key infrastructure issues?
Particularly infrastructure as it relates to this portfolio. Thoughts?
It's a very valid point. The HART, again, points towards the highways portfolio, so that will be debated this afternoon more than in this group. But yeah, I appreciate your point. I've tried to pick out that as by far and away the biggest, longest term strategic project, but absolutely infrastructure more generally, digital connectivity, utilities are all part of that environment growth infrastructure agenda. So no intent to deliberately exclude them, just trying to encapsulate them within a wider agenda. But, and again, working with other parts of the county council on that. So I know the resources team is leading a lot of work on the digital agenda, for example.
Thank you for that. No other hands up there. We were threatened with a 20-minute break at about 15 minutes ago. So I'm going to give you now and finish this session if I can. And we're going to come back on the same, if we can, on the same login in about 20 minutes. Let's come back at 25 past if we can, please. 25 past 10, if we can come back then, latest 25 past 11, shall I say. Come back then and we'll go through what we think we should be, points we should be making, if any, to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee later in the well, next month, I guess it's next week. Yeah? So if I can pause the session, please, and if you can come back in, I say in 15
Chairman, you're live.
Thank you. So it looks like we're back on stream now, campers. Yeah. And we are now going to resume as it's 25 past. I'll just check and make sure that people are back in. Fiona, are you coming in?
Yes, sorry. Sorry, apologies. The meeting, I had a bit of an IT issue there. Yeah, so thanks, Chairman. I'm just going to run through just a couple of the sort of key things that seem to come out, and then where it sounds like you might have some recommendations, and then hand over to you as members to discuss where you want to go with that. So I think that one of the things that was really helpful that came out of the discussion was for members to get clarification on how the funding for the example was Harlow and Gilston is being taken from Homes England via the county council. The county council kind of works as a middleman rather than from the council's budget. So I think members had, I think that's an area that was a bit unclear to a lot of members looking at the IP pack. And then also one of the other key things in discussion, there was a lot of discussion on how progress on projects like that are monitored and intermediary objectives, and so how councillors can gain sort of oversight and updates on that. And that then I think it was acknowledged that officers would pick this up and report to the relevant cabinet panel to allow members to have that oversight, that ongoing oversight. And another point that seemed to be important was obviously recognising the potential changes to planning law that may be on the horizon. And then I think there was a lot of reassurance from officers about sort of being aware of the potential options and impacts of that, and readiness to sort of respond quickly and work in an agile way to adapt to any of those sort of changes. So there were two areas where I thought there might be recommendations, and one of them, the main sort of key one I think from the discussion was around the LEP. So the group definitely acknowledged that the LEP is instrumental in facilitating Hertfordshire's growth economically and providing training and supporting startup businesses and working to redevelop town centres. And so the group may want to recommend something along the lines that it's vital that contingency arrangements are in place to continue this work and the partnerships that the LEP has developed. So that was the one. And then there was a second area I thought a recommendation may come out of this group, but also specifically for this portfolio. But I feel that this may be a recommendation that something similar might come forward in other portfolios. So it might end up being one of the kind of strategic recommendations around staffing. And so for this portfolio specifically, there could be a recommendation around that contingency should be in place for staffing if vacancies continue in the sort of planning area or increase, because there was a acknowledgement that it's a fragile thing that it's not comparatively too bad at the moment, but it could increase. And so I think that from your discussion, there was some really constructive points about the importance of working across local government in the area and in Hertfordshire and perhaps surrounding like London boroughs to kind of find the solution and the contingency plans for this. So around the recruitment and training programs. So the point was made that there is this shortage of staff in these certain areas. So if you're you're training up a planning officer and then they're kind of poached by a district council and vice versa. So there's a small pool of these officers for all of local government to sort of access. So I think it's something around staffing and around that that need to kind of make it across different local government organisations, not just the county council, also districts and perhaps surrounding ones. And that was all I wanted to highlight. So I'll hand back over to you now, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. I guess you say two things in particular for highlighting, which was the LEP and staffing. and they perhaps are issues which we can raise and make suggestions. The other three things was funding Homes England needs clarification. We also said that monitoring projects, we need to see how it reports to the cabinet panels, the processes, and I'm sure it is in place, but we need convincing of that. And changes to planning law, the potential, and are we being agile enough to respond to that in the future? I think that whilst those 5 things, 2 and 3 things are important, I mean, when we make recommendations, these recommendations up to the scrutiny committee, these recommendations would be to, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Fiona, I'd suggest to scrutiny, or suggest changes, or suggest that that comments are made up to Cabinet Council on our thoughts. Is that the process you're looking for?
Yeah, that's right. I particularly, ideally, particularly we want to focus on things that can be reported to Cabinet, and then Cabinet can respond to them as part of this budget scrutiny process. If things are kind of identified for scrutiny, then we can pick those up as well. But what, that first and foremost is to report your key recommendations through to Cabinet, then they can, give a full response and as part of this budget scrutiny process. So that's all taken on board before the budget is then agreed by full council.
Okay, thank you. Colette, you want to say something?
Yes, please. It was in particular in relation to the recommendation about staffing. And I would like something in there about, it's not just about the finance. It's about doing things differently. It's about cooperation across the county and so on. And sometimes I think we all too often, this is just reflection, we all too often jump to saying, right, throw more money at something to solve a problem. And it's about doing things differently and being, what's the word? Thinking at a tangent. That was all, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Yeah, following on from Colette, really. Yeah, I agree. Staffing did come up quite strongly, I think, in that meeting. And I mean, my concerns with the staffing issue, especially with planning. We see it at districts and in counties whereby, yeah, recruitment. I agree. We should have recruitment. By apprenticeships and graduates, etc., which has been difficult. Problem there is we get we invest quite a bit in their training and knowledge of the job, etc., and then suddenly after 5 years experience they go off to the private sector who can offer them more money. So I don't know how we address that, and I mean, that is a concern of mine. We found it very much at district. In fact, we thought actually they were going from district planning. They were sort of going up the hill to county. I don't think that's quite the case. So I think it's the private sector that is an issue. I don't know how we address that, but something, I don't know, something on those lines I'd like to see, or some sort of mention of it.
Okay, got that.
Recommendation.
Nigel?
Can I just respond back to Jeff and to elaborate on what I was saying before, that I put forward that we should actually train up more people than we know we'll need, because we know a lot of them will actually go to the private sector. And if you increase supply, you control the wages, because we are creating more demand with our long-term plan for more housing, more development, more people in Hertfordshire. Therefore, we know there's going to be an increase in demand. Therefore, we should make sure there's an excess increase in supply, and that will help control the cost of the service. If you do not increase supply to match demand, prices will go up. If you increase supply to match demand, prices can be stabilised. And we have to build that into our philosophy on staffing, making sure the right people are there. I also note what was said earlier about the fact that if you have a existing member of staff trying to do all the work and supervise trainees, this is something that is very challenging. But I also know from my own experience of developing new staff, you have to have sufficient staff to not be actually doing the work, but supporting the trainees who are doing a lot of the work, and only the higher value stuff is done by the experienced staff. So it can be done, but it has to be done carefully. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Stephen, you want to respond to that?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 points I'd make. Firstly, over years and years, surveys which have been done on employees have shown that salaries are not the only things that count. Working conditions, ambience of the office, all these things count as well. We are now entering the hybrid time of working, and so the county will have to be careful of how it deals with the hybrid working for people. The people who like to work in an office, hybrid working may not be satisfactory. So care will be needed in the way in which we deal with hybrid working. Second thing is, graduates will tend to stay if they have got a career path ahead of them. Many graduates move after 2 or 3 years because they can't see a route to promotion. So they move to other districts and councils to get that route to promotion. So having a promotion route is very important. The third point on this, of course, it does cost to run graduates. And for the first year or so, they may not be terribly useful, but they need looking after. So there is an on cost for graduates for a time. So employing a lot of graduates to make up numbers does have its limitations. Thank you.
Very point, yes. Jan, you want to come in now?
Yeah, mine is also about the employment side. Colin mentioned, I think it was Colin, sorry if it wasn't, mentioned working with Hertfordshire University. I just wonder how proactive we're being at talking to other universities. He mentioned that there was a new professor at Hertfordshire. I happen to know that professor has come down from Liverpool University, which is the top planning, or is known to be the top planning university in the country. Just because people are not necessarily at Hertfordshire University, they could be from Hertfordshire and at unis all around the country. But also with the working from home, the fact that he mentioned that a lot of people work from home more now, and that we could have employees working from much further afield. Talking to those universities and employing people from all around the country might be a really good option for university graduates, because most of them have been learning online for the last 3 years. They're very used to being at home and working from home. That was just a sort of hopefully a helpful point there.
Jan, very valid what you make there. I could add a couple of things on there, of course, is that one thing that those university graduates will lack is the interaction with people by working from on their screens all the time, which is something which we miss, and we be enthusiastic. And going back to the point made about the packages we offer, because one thing we have, which is our pension scheme. The local government pension scheme is, to say the least, nice, should we say, compared with some of the other pension schemes. But of course, many of our graduates have not got that far down their journey of life to think about pension schemes in the future. So it's a great selling point for a local government, but not always to everybody. Paul, you want to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean the issue of staff shortages is one that it is key, and all local authorities are seeing that across the country. One of the issues that you rightly identify is career paths, other options, other benefits from working in local government rather than the private sector, and there are many a myriad of those. But one of the things that we could actively do in terms of career path is to look at the ability of the planning system and service in HCC to deliver that kind of career path. Now, the bigger a service is, the more options in terms of a career path there are. So amalgamation starts to make sense from that perspective as well. It also adds a level of contingency and robustness for the lack of staff in a particular area. If you have planning staff in, say, ecology, they are still planners and therefore can backfill things in other areas if they have extra capacity. If you have people in different directorates and in different portfolios, that becomes more difficult. I just think that one of the things that we could recommend to address not just staffing, but also potential efficiency, improving communications, is looking at how our planning services are delivered in the different portfolios, not just in things. We have planning in the title of this panel, in the title of this portfolio. And we ought to, I think, be looking at whether we've got that right. And one of the recommendations we could put forward would be, should we look at a more comprehensive planning portfolio than we currently have? And I think that's one of the things that we could recommend, because there's a raft of reasons why we should do that.
And there's one other reason why we have to be careful. We have to be able to split the differentiation between those who are directing down on what the planning process is for the future and those who are the operational planning side, like development control. There has to be a clear division of responsibility there. Otherwise, it could be seen that there's a driver coming. So that's why you have a split between the two, to make sure that development control is seen to be independent of the processes of planning within the local authority. It has to reflect those, but has to be seen to be taking decisions based on the information in front of it. Jonathan, you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree with your point earlier on about pensions and young people. They don't tend to take pensions seriously until they're about the age of 30. But I remember chairing the IP process for the resources portfolio a couple of years ago, and this issue of staffing and retaining staffing came up then, and it's usually about planning officers more often than not. I had thought that there was some sort of loose structure within Hertfordshire where the districts and the county are very much involved in discussions about planning officers that may be even stronger than that. I don't know, but perhaps some officers may want to comment on that.
Does an officer want to comment on that?
Just to come in, Chair, I don't think there is anything formal in Hertfordshire at the moment that easily allows us to switch. You can second officers, but there's no formalised programme that really encourages that at the moment. But it is on that list I referenced, something we'll be talking about in next month or so.
Thank you. I don't think it's formal. I thought it was informal and but more forward than it was, say, 5 years ago. But yeah, okay.
David Andrews, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. If it's appropriate at this stage, I would just like to encourage you to ask members of OSC that are engaged with this meeting this morning if they've got any questions. We've heard from Jeff and yourself and others, but are there any other members of OSC watching the meeting who are able to have any questions they want to ask very, very briefly? And is the exec member in a position to respond to them? With your blessing, Chairman.
I'm open to anybody who's sitting here to ask questions. But I have now, Sandy, you've got a question or poser.
Just a comment. It's been really interesting listening in to this as a kind of interested observer. I mean, I think the issue of metrics, and it's one that always challenges us at cabinet panels. But I think, you know, actually thinking about interim metrics for some of these really big projects, milestones, would be, I think, quite an interesting question to ask. Otherwise, clearly, the staffing issues are massive, and I think that's going to be an overarching theme across the whole of the IP scrutiny this year. And I thought it was quite an interesting discussion about planning and local councils and strategic plans and what happens if they all fall over. But that may not be a question, but certainly it made me think of it coming from St Albans. But anyway, I just actually felt that those two first points I made, I think you really should be coming forward with something like that to OSC, I hope.
We may well do. We will come up with some comments and some any other thoughts and comments. So far, I have in front of me what's been put up so far. David, you want to come back in again?
Well, if I may again, Chairman, yeah, just really, I don't know if the exec member would like to comment on any of the recommendations that he's heard being fleshed out there, but could I just salute the comment he made? Also, my cameras are not on. I do apologise. I very much support the comments to some extent that Nigel made, but certainly that Stephen made around this business of it's more than the salary. It is considerably more than the salary. There are so many other factors to employment, and career path was quite rightly referred to. But as a former serviceman, I never ever underestimate the true wonder of teamwork. It pulls people through difficult times. It takes them into places that they wouldn't otherwise necessarily go. And as we go into a more hybridized working environment, I think concentration on team building, team working, team recognition will be a big factor. So I just put that in there if I may. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Let me go through what's been raised so far, if I can. And I've got you, Ken, coming in. Let me just go through what I've got so far. I have the funding from Homes England for Harlow. It needs clarification of how that's going to work, and it seems a lot of money, the process that it has to go through then. So perhaps we can ask that. Monitoring projects and how that's reported to the cabinet panels, the process and the progress and how that's reported to the cabinet panels. Changes in planning law, a preparation for that. Are we agile in meeting those sorts of things? The comments we can make and pass those comments on as appropriate. When it came to issues, we had, yes, a future of LEP, because it's a very great concern of ours that if we do not have a LEP, it's vital that we have something in its place. And we really got to be aware that we have resources, and that is not just money. People think resources is money. It's not. It's time, energy, and people to do that. And finally, the big one, which I'm hearing from you people, is staffing. And on the staffing side, we have various contingencies working in the office and how we work with other districts, boroughs, etc., etc. But cooperation with those, particularly when it comes to graduates, and how we can move some of these apprentices and graduates around so they get full exposure. Perhaps the University of Hertfordshire is not the only university we should be approaching. There may be others locally can do that. And we have to mention as well that, of course, from a local government perspective, some of the benefits we have as local government, including pension, are substantial, and perhaps the private sector, but that doesn't always come into the equation. Sharon, you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do think we need to reflect the fact that, I know we won't really know the answer to this until the Levelling Up white paper is published, but if we don't get the funding we need for the infrastructure for the growth in Hertfordshire, then we need to have a contingency plan to deal with that going forward. So that there are resources in terms of pulling that together, but there is also the fact that we will have a serious infrastructure deficit to cope with the growth we're anticipating in Hertfordshire if we don't get the Hertfordshire growth deal. So I think that and the possibilities you've already mentioned around not having the local enterprise partnership anymore could be a kind of perfect storm of resource need, not just for the county council, for the districts as well. But I think we need to flag that up as a need for a contingency in Hertfordshire.
Okay, well, I'll link the two together as well, because they're both operational from a LEP and also from the growth board. They are certainly ones which work together, and we have to be sure we've got things in place for both if we don't get growth funding, and also if the LEP goes and it's part of a similar process. Once they say similar process, they have different roles. Jan, you want to come in?
Yes, sorry, just on your summing up there, my comment wasn't about looking at other local universities, it was looking at national universities, because we could have youngsters that coming out of university anywhere in the country that would be interested, not just locally, because they could live on our doorstep but be in university in Edinburgh.
Yeah, I think what I said was we should look at not just Hertford University.
But you did say then other local universities is what you said, and I was just
any other universities in Hertfordshire, other than Hertfordshire University. I might be mistaken. There's certainly colleges which I know are very operational. Stevenage is a big one there, and certainly and Hitchin I know just up my neck of the woods where there's colleges which are doing good things. Thank you, Jane. We'll take your hand down. Any other thoughts, comments? What the plan for me is to take what you said here, put it on a piece of paper. In fact, I say me, Benji, to put it on a piece of paper, put it together. It's going to come back to me, and I'll have a look at it and doctor it and play around. Then I'll get it out to you people, and let you have a look at it for constructive comments on there. And of course, you can make. I'm sure you can make these much longer, and we can end up with 10 pages of them. We're not going to do that. I'll guillotine them. We've got to be succinct, and we've got to be. Should we say concentrate on those issues which the IP is related to? So I'll try and bring that into the equation as well about what this particular portfolio is doing around certain things that we've mentioned and how that's going to operate. Are you content with that process, Fiona?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I've absolutely captured all the points that have been made in this discussion subsequent to me kind of, putting out the first ideas. So I've captured all of that, and so you won't expect anything.
Fiona, you froze, I'm sorry to say. I'll come back to you. Stephen, you want to come in while we unfreeze Fiona?
Yeah, certainly. All I would say to you is it would be useful if you separated matters which were just dealing with this portfolio against matters which were council matters generally. And I think that's important. And certainly as costs go, separating the two are important. One other point I would say is that as far as planning goes, there are specialist courses on planning which are at different universities around the country. And as Jan has said, it may be going to those universities. At one time, big firms and councils used to do a milk round and go and see the universities and set out their stall. I mean, we haven't been able to do that during COVID, but that's not a bad plan to get more people who have the specialist knowledge, because a lot of planners will do planning as a university course and then come out and then become members of the Royal Town Planning Institute. So they're professionally qualified.
Thank you for that input. I'm not terribly sure if Fiona's picked those up because she is hung up at the moment. She is in suspended animation according to my screen. Is that the same for everybody?
Yeah, I've picked it up though. I've picked it up, Chairman. So I'll pass it on. I picked that up. It's a very valid point, and thanks to Jan and Stephen for dealing with it. I've picked it up.
If you, David, and Fiona and Benji can put those together and get them to me, I really would appreciate it. Yeah, and I'll have a look and perhaps Doctor, don't know, play and get them out to the team here for their input. And we've got to do that within a relatively short space of time, I guess, David, haven't we?
Yep. Yes, ideally we were going to formally try and put the recommendations out at this point, but clearly these will take a little bit more fettling. So perfectly acceptable. Thank you.
And I'm not prepared to do that. I'm prepared to put them together and then get them back out again and back again within 24-hour timetables on this, because I think it's important that we sing from a similar hymn book. I didn't say the same hymn book. I said similar hymn books on these things, if that suits you. Any other questions and comments before we get to the 12th hour and close? Fiona, I don't know if you can hear us. I doubt it, but
now I'm back.
You're back. Wonderful.
Yeah, so sorry, I just completely lost the connection. So, but I think Natalie came in and finished what I was going to say. Did she?
No, I didn't hear that, and your face is frozen on my screen.
No, I captured the points, the relevant points, Fiona. So I'll liaise with you in a minute.
Okay, I'll leave it in your very capable hands to coordinate that, David, with Fiona, and also keep Benji in the loop as well, because he was very instrumental in making sure that he does his role and responsibilities in this. Yeah? On that note, and with no other hands up, can I thank you for your participation? Can I thank you for your unique contributions, and I'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can, and hopefully we'll cover all the items, perhaps not the level of detail you have here, but certainly we will try and cover the points that have been raised in a way that does include the issues which we've raised. So on that note, and thank you officers for arranging it, and thank you participants, I'm now going to formally close the meeting and say see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, everyone.